Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video. Today we are going over my top 30 running back rankings for week 2 of fantasy football. Starting it off in S tier, Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler. McCaffrey's going against the Rams, Eckler against the Tennessee Titans. I mean, McCaffrey and Eckler are going to be pretty self-explanatory in S tier every single week here on out as long as they are healthy. But we do have to talk about Joshua Kelly a little bit later on because Austin Eckler might be out on Sunday, so that's going to be a big hit to Eckler owners. Hopefully, you grab Joshua Kelly off of waivers. I mean, McCaffrey and Eckler, they show exactly what you want out of that number 1 and number 2 running back pick, so they're going to be up in S tier every single week, like I said. All right, also in S tier this week, I decided to throw him in here. It's going to be Derrick Henry going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. I put him in S tier because he has a great matchup. Los Angeles just gave up 36 points to the Miami Dolphins last week. Now, the Miami Dolphins have Raheem Mostert on their team. He was the running back in that game against the Chargers. He didn't really get going with the run game, but Derrick Henry is not going to be compared to Raheem Mostert by any means. There are some clear concerns with Derrick Henry, though, I must say. Number 1, he's getting older, obviously. And number 2, Tajay Spears in week number 1 actually outsnapped him. Does that mean Derrick Henry is going to be eliminated completely from this offense or even have a big enough workload hit for him to not be your number 1 starting running back? I don't think so. I really don't. Now, the Titans love to slow down the game, and I think they could do exactly that against the Chargers, especially if they don't have Eckler in the lineup this week. I'm expecting a real grindy type game. You know, when you turn on a Tennessee Titans game, you expect it to be low scoring, really grindy. They have a good defense, so they will be able to get the ball back and hopefully control the pace. That's why Derrick Henry is up in S tier. All right, now we're going to drop it down to A tier here. I debated on keeping Pollard in S tier, but I dropped him down to A. He has a tough matchup against the New York Jets, but if Dallas's defense can do what they did on Sunday night against the Giants, hold them, off the field majority of the game, then Tony Pollard is going to go crazy. Dallas's offensive line has been elite for I don't know how many years now. Jets defense last week gave up just 3.8 yards per carry to James Cook on Monday night, but James Cook is not Tony Pollard. Okay, Tony Pollard is a much better running back. So if the Cowboys can control the pace of this game, I like Tony Pollard a lot. He should be your running back number 1 in most fantasy football leagues, unless you took 2 running backs off the bat. Anyways, regardless, he should be in your starting lineup in week number 2. And every week going forward, all right, enough of Tony Pollard. All right, number 5, Saquon Barkley against the Arizona Cardinals. Barkley was basically shut down in that game against the Dallas Cowboys. That defense would not let them do anything at all. But I got to expect some sort of bounce back from Saquon Barkley and the New York Giants in week number 2 against one of the worst teams in the National Football League. Arizona actually did play some sneaky good defense against the Washington Commanders in week number 1. They held Brian Robinson Jr. to just 3.1 yards per carry. Once again, Saquon Barkley is not Brian Robinson Jr. These are not comparable athletes by any means, at least so far in Brian Robinson Jr.'s career. Now, the over-under is set to 39.5 in this game, so not a lot of points are expected to be scored in this one, but that doesn't mean Saquon Barkley shouldn't be in your starting lineup, and he can also have a fabulous game on Sunday. Number 6, we have Bijan Robinson against the Green Bay Packers. Bijan showed us exactly what we wanted to see in week number 1, putting up over 20 PPR fantasy points and finding the end zone after that nasty juke play. I don't know if you guys were watching the game, but it was absolutely disgusting. Broke the defender's ankles and got into the end zone on a receiving touchdown. It was beautiful. Now, I'm not too sure what the situation is looking like with Tyler Algier going forward. Are they going to basically split carries and then Bijan's going to be more on the field for the passing downs and get a little more work in that regard? Or is Bijan going to be slowly taking all of that work on? We'll have to see. I don't know how you can really take the ball out of Tyler Algier's hands after week number 1. I think he's at least got to be in there for goal line situations. Now, Bijan clearly ran more routes than Algier while he played just as many snaps as him. So it's kind of up for debate what we're going to see in the upcoming weeks here. We know for a fact, though, that the Falcons love to run the ball. And Drake London and Kyle Pitts, I'm very worried about those guys. I didn't put them in my players to not panic on for a good reason, because I'm panicking on those 2 players. They just run the ball way too many times. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on going forward, back to Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson. But Bijan is a sturdy running back number 1 going forward in fantasy. Number 7 on our list today, we have Travis Etienne. We're still in A tier here. He's going against the Kansas City Chiefs. He looked great in week number 1 against the Colts. Most importantly, though, he was more involved in the passing game than in the past. That's exactly what we talked about in the offseason. He would be worth that 3rd, 4th round pick only if he got more receiving work. And we saw it in week number 1, 5 receptions for 27 yards. And that boosts his floor up massively, especially in PPR leagues. That right there, 5 receptions, 27 yards, is 7.7 PPR fantasy points without any rushing work alone, which is great to see. Even if the Chiefs pull ahead in this game on Sunday, Travis Etienne's still going to get that passing work, so his floor is that much higher, like we just said, which you love. Now, this game is supposed to be the highest scoring matchup of the entire week. The over-under is set to 51.5 points. Hopefully, that's going to mean a lot of opportunities for the Jags offense to take advantage of. Number 8, we have Josh Jacobs against the Buffalo Bills. I don't think this one should be overthought too much. I don't think you can overthink this one. He had a tough matchup in week number 1 against the Denver Broncos, who only allowed Jacobs to just 48 yards on the ground. That's very uncharacteristic of him. The more games he plays, I think the better he's going to get. You know, he was holding out in the preseason. He didn't play any preseason games. He wasn't at practice. So how do you expect this guy to just jump into the offense again and go crazy? It's just not going to happen for a couple of weeks. Once we get eased into things, then we can expect prime Josh Jacobs to be back. And this is a great opportunity to do so against a Buffalo Bills defense who just had Breece Hall run all over them for 127 yards on just 10 carries. I'm feeling much more confident in Jacobs in week number 2. Number 9 here, dropping it down a tier, we have Nick Chubb going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Nice little game on Sunday from Nick Chubb against the Bengals, which was not the easiest matchup in the world. I will say the conditions were favoring him. It was very rainy in this matchup. We did see what we wanted to with him, though. He was also more involved in the passing game, just like we wanted out of Etienne. We expected that Chubb would be more involved in the passing game now that Kareem Hunt is gone. It's exactly what we saw. 4 receptions for 21 yards. We'll take that all day. That's 6.1 PPR fantasy points right there. Now, it was never his pure rushing ability that was in question. All right, he went over 100 yards on Sunday yet again against the Bengals pretty easily. Ford did play a good amount, I will say, but I think that was mostly because of the game script. Jerome Ford was in the game, much more than you'll probably see later on in this season. I might have him too low this week because of what CMC did to Pittsburgh, but I think Pittsburgh's defense is going to be out for blood. They're not going to take a beating like that again. I think this is going to be a much closer game, so we have Chubb in B tier at number 9. Next up at number 10, we have Aaron Jones against the Atlanta Falcons. He had a great game against the Bears. We had him in A tier last week, and I think he outperformed. I think he was S tier. I believe he was the number 1 running back in fantasy in week number 1. That was great to see. I still think this matchup against the Falcons is not a bad one whatsoever, but his leg is pretty banged up. So that is definitely something to monitor going into Sunday. If he cannot go, I think A.J. Dillon moves into the top 20-ish. He didn't look good last Sunday, but Aaron Jones is still the big play guy here. But if he doesn't play, A.J. Dillon obviously has to get moved up this list. Number 11, we have Joe Mixon going up against the Baltimore Ravens. Mixon, to be honest with you, was one of the only decent parts of the Bengals offense against the Browns. I'm expecting a huge bounce back game from the entire Bengals team here. Close divisional game in this one where they should be able to control the tempo a little bit better and get Mixon involved more like they did last season. I have him here purely based on the volume that I'm expecting him to get and his pass catching ability. I don't think Mixon is going to wow you week after week after week, but he did have that massive game last year where he scored 55.1, so you never know with Mixon. I'm not counting him out, but I like some other options over him this week. Number 12, we have Ramondre Stevenson going up against the Miami Dolphins. Now, it's very reassuring week number 1 out of Ramondre, even though he was absolutely stuffed by Philly's defensive line. He caught those passes late in the game. He made up for it with that fantasy value in PPR leagues, especially. He only managed 2.1 yards per carry on the ground. This is a much easier defense that he's going against this week, Dolphins rather than the Eagles. Okay, now the real takeaway here, though, was that Zeke didn't eat into his role as much as a lot of people were thinking in the offseason. Stevenson played 58 out of a total 80 snaps and ran 17 more routes than Zeke. I think it's safe to say that Zeke took the Damian Harris role from last year. If you drafted Ramondre with that third, fourth round pick, you're absolutely fine. He could be an RB1 this year. Number 13, we have Kenneth Walker. This is dropping it down just another tier to C. He's going against the Detroit Lions. He struggled in week number 1 to get enough carries. That was really the only problem, but that was because of the game script. They fell down in this game, and the second half, they could not do anything. They couldn't move the ball at all, and he didn't get any chances. Walker is still that number 1 in Seattle. We saw that in week number 1. Also, he had 4 receptions, all right? Even though they didn't go anywhere, it still makes his floor that much higher week after week, especially in those PPR leagues. Now, it was promising to also see him get 5.3 average yards per carry with no limitations from that groin injury that he was suffering from in the preseason. Good to know that's not lingering into the regular season. If the Seahawks keep it close this week, I can easily see Kenneth Walker having a great game against the Lions. Number 14, this one's a little bit surprising that I have him up this high, but the matchup is too good to not have him up here. We have James Cook against the Las Vegas Raiders. I would argue that Cook looked pretty good compared to the rest of this Bills offense that fell almost completely flat except for Stephon Diggs. Cook had 4 catches for 17 yards, which makes his floor fairly high as well in PPR leagues. But I can't rank him any higher because the Buffalo Bills hate running. They've hated running for the longest time. The last couple of seasons, we went back in time, took a look at who was the last decent fantasy running back for the Bills, and it was LaShawn McCoy when he was there. That being said, Las Vegas should be a much better opponent for Cook to go against than the Jets in week number 1. If the Bills pull ahead early, Cook could get a lot of work in this matchup and easily outperform his fantasy projections. Number 15, Jahmyr Gibbs against the Seattle Seahawks. I debated him putting him in the next tier here in D, but I had to put him in C tier. I just believe this guy, I believe in his talent too much. Okay, he's going to be a stud later on in the season, but I think that could start sooner rather than later. Week 2, it's not a bad matchup. Seattle's defense struggled in week number 1, stopping Kyren Williams. He scored 2 times in the second half last week. I don't care if Montgomery is going to get more carries on a week-to-week basis necessarily. Gibbs doesn't need that many touches to be effective. He can get you those 15 PPR fantasy points in just about 30 snaps. So we'll take that all day of the week, and that's why he's at number 15 here. Dropping it down a tier here at number 16, we have Rachaad White going against the Chicago Bears. Now, even though he had a rough game in week 1, he still saw all the running back work. He played on 54 out of a possible 68 snaps and ran 21 routes. Tucker and Edmonds didn't even sniff that type of usage, so I don't think you have to worry too much about Rachaad White just yet. The real caution here is the offensive line. It's not his ability to play necessarily. At least that's what I believe. I think you just need to hope for more efficiency this week against a Bears team who was absolutely bullied in week number 1 by Aaron Jones. They will allow the running backs to catch passes. Like we saw in week 1, Aaron Jones had the most receiving yards on Green Bay. Rachaad White, do I think he's going to get the most receiving yards on the team over Chris Godwin and Mike Evans? Absolutely not. But can he catch a couple balls for 40, 50 yards? I do think so. I would give him 1 or 2 more weeks before you really start panicking on Rachaad White and going out and seeking trades for him. Number 17, we have James Conner against the New York Giants. This is the definition of a workhorse running back who relies on volume. We saw that in week number 1. He put up a very reliable, it's not going to be pretty, but he put up 12 fantasy points in PPR leagues. He isn't going to wow you unless he scores a few times, unless he gets into the end zone from those short yardage situations. But once again, this is a player with a extremely high pass catching floor. Giants could be a tough matchup this week. I will say that this is expected to also be a very low scoring game, but James Conner should be, he should be a solid flex option at the very least going forward. Number 18, we have Javonte Williams going against the Washington Commanders. We saw some very encouraging things from Williams in week number 1, back from that ACL injury. He put up 9.7 PPR fantasy points, which isn't great, but he played just as many snaps as Samaje Perine, and that workload should only go up as the weeks go on. He also had more carries than Perine and caught 4 passes. Even though they didn't really go anywhere, still catching 4 passes, once again, like we've talked about many times in this video, raises your PPR floor. Now, he has upside later on in the year to be a low-end RB1 in my opinion, but as of right now, I'd rank him, probably mid-range RB2. Number 19, we have Breece Hall. Okay, I didn't even have Breece Hall ranked in the top 30 last week, so this is a massive jump for him. Going against the Dallas Cowboys, this is a very tough matchup, but I'm not counting him out like I did in week 1. Even on his limited snap count, he made it all worth it. Even if this guy gets 10 snaps in this game, which he won't, he should pull away as the number 1 running back in the upcoming weeks. He's the most explosive running back on this team. And even if you have Dalvin Cook on your team, I'd be a little bit worried. I would be a little bit worried if you drafted Dalvin Cook because Breece Hall looks so much better. In game number 1 back, imagine what he's going to do later on in the season. Now, like I said, I hate this matchup. This is probably the worst matchup you can get here. That's my only negative about Breece Hall this week. He's definitely going to be higher in the future, but we'll stick him at 19 for now. Number 20, we have David Montgomery going against the Seattle Seahawks. Now, Montgomery saw the majority of the carries in week number 1 against the Chiefs because they were easing Jahmyr Gibbs into this offense. I think Gibbs gets a good amount more work this upcoming week, but I still think we got a couple more weeks of Montgomery leading in carries. And even when Jahmyr Gibbs is at his full potential, I think they run a lot of 2 running back sets. Montgomery should be the goal line back here in Detroit. So if they get down to that 1 yard line, you could probably count on Montgomery getting a couple of chances before Gibbs does. Kyren Williams found the end zone 2 times last week against the Seahawks, like we said earlier. So what I'm saying is Montgomery might find the end zone as well this upcoming Sunday. Number 21, we have Najee Harris going up against the Cleveland Browns. This is another tough matchup for Najee Harris. I feel like he just really can't catch a break in these first 2 games. San Francisco and then Cleveland back-to-back. That's rough. Weeks number 3 and 4, I think Najee's really going to shine. All right, he's going against the Las Vegas Raiders and the Houston Texans, 2 teams with not great run defenses. Now, Pittsburgh looked terrible in week number 1, but you can't really blame them. They were going against the San Fran team who, was in the NFC Championship last year, and now they have all of their defense back. I'm expecting a little bit more out of Najee this week. I really don't think there's going to be fireworks just yet. Like I said, I'd be much more comfortable starting him in weeks 3 and 4. Also, just a thing to keep an eye on is Jaylen Warren's workload. Let's see if he gets more snaps this week or if it stays consistent. Number 22, we have Dameon Pierce going against the Indianapolis Colts. Dameon Pierce is a great runner. I've said it time and time again. This is a terrible situation for him. Not a bad matchup by any means, but I expect this to be a low-scoring game yet again. Houston could easily fall down in this matchup early, and all the defenses have to do against the Texans is stack the box and try to make CJ Stroud beat him through the air. Until he proves that he can do that, Dameon Pierce is going to struggle. That being said, Indianapolis is still an easier matchup than the Ravens was last week. I'd expect a little bit better of a performance out of Pierce, maybe around the 10 mark, but I'm not going crazy. I'm not feeling great about starting him. Number 23, Miles Sanders going against the New Orleans Saints. This one is a tough matchup here. We saw Derrick Henry not be, completely himself last week against the Saints. Sanders looked pretty solid in week number 1, averaging 4.0 yards per carry and caught 4 passes to go along with that. This is another situation where the points are going to be hard to come by, and Bryce Young is going to have to step up and show that he can really lead this team before I can fully believe in Miles Sanders. I feel like Miles Sanders is a flex play at best right now, at least this week against the Saints. Number 24, we have Jamal Williams going against the Carolina Panthers. I wouldn't completely give up on Jamal just yet. He was going against the best run defense in 2022, the Tennessee Titans in week 1. Now he's going against the Carolina Panthers, who just gave up a ton of points to Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier, a ton of rushing yards on the ground. The Saints should be able to control this game and get Jamal the ball a lot more than in week number 1. But I still have to say, you better watch out for sneaky Taysom Hill near the goal line. That guy is a vulture. At least he was last season when I had Kamara on my team, so watch out. Number 25, dropping it down to F tier here. Not like F tier is bad. If you're in the top 30, everybody on this list is good. We have Tyler Algier, who had a fabulous week 1. He's going against the Green Bay Packers. He scored 2 touchdowns in week 1, all while playing just 4 less snaps than Bijan Robinson on offense. This proves exactly what we wanted to know, all right? This is going to be a 2-headed backfield with Bijan and Algier, and if Algier is going to keep playing this well, there's no way they can't give him the ball. I think they can both be fantasy relevant. Now, this week is a tougher matchup against Green Bay than last week, but after week 1, I'm not leaving Algier off this top 30 list. Number 26 is Isaiah Pacheco going against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I'm not necessarily too happy with what I saw in week number 1 out of Pacheco. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was involved much more than I would have liked. The snap count was 31 for Pacheco, 20 for McKinnon, and 14 for Edwards-Helaire. Now, this could be a 3-headed backfield, and we've seen in the past, 3-headed backfields do not offer great fantasy value. All right. Also, it doesn't help that the Chiefs don't love running the ball whatsoever. I'd be sitting Pacheco this week against the Jaguars, even though this is supposed to be a high-scoring game. I could see McKinnon getting more involved in week number 2 here. Next up, we have A.J. Dillon going against the Atlanta Falcons. This is assuming that Aaron Jones plays in week number 2. If he does not, then I said A.J. Dillon would be bumped up to top 20. Now, he had a terrible, ugly performance in week number 1 against the Chicago Bears, averaging 1.5 yards per carry. Had 13 attempts for 19 yards. Not what you want to see whatsoever. He has shown the potential, though, to catch passes out of the backfield, which I do like. If Jones is limited, then Dillon should definitely be moved up, like I said, purely based on the volume. But like I said, I didn't like what I saw out of week 1 from A.J. Dillon. So probably a flex play at best, even if Aaron Jones sits out. At number 28 here, dropping it down yet another tier to G, we have Raheem Mostert going against the New England Patriots. Pretty mediocre game from Mostert against Los Angeles last week. I thought this would have been an easy matchup for him. He's lucky he found the end zone, or it would have been a fantasy dud. The Pats are not the same defense as the Chargers were, so this is a much tougher matchup. I'd be probably staying away from Raheem Mostert in week number 2. Number 29, we have Brian Robinson Jr. Honestly, these two could have been flip-flop. Raheem Mostert and Brian Robinson. Brutal matchup against the Denver Broncos. You saw what they did last week against Josh Jacobs, holding him to a little over 2 yards per carry, which was disgusting. Brian Robinson is another guy that's dependent heavily on volume. What was good to see in week number 1 from Robinson is he was playing much more than Gibson was. It's tough to start him against the Denver Broncos. I can't lie to you. I'd probably be sitting him until a better matchup arises. And last but not least, we have Kyren Williams against the San Francisco 49ers. I debated even putting him on this list. I know he was a waiver wire prospect and like at the top of everybody's waiver wire list this week. I just don't trust it yet. All right. I picked up Kyren Williams last season when everybody thought Cam Akers was falling off. And then the next week, Cam Akers comes back and he's the starting running back. So I don't trust it yet. All right. Was this week number 1 a Rams fluke, or is this how they're going to play the rest of the season? Matt Stafford looked good, but I just don't know what to expect out of this team just yet. So I'm not playing Kyren Williams, especially against one of the best defenses in the National Football League in week 2. Also, some honorable mentions that were not listed on here. Bears running backs, Khalil Herbert, Dante Foreman, and Roschon Johnson. I think Roschon Johnson looked the best out of all of them. Khalil Herbert had a decent game, don't get me wrong, but I just don't trust any of them right now in fantasy. Dalvin Cook as well, behind Breece Hall. I don't know how you can start Dalvin Cook after that week 1 performance that Breece Hall had. You got to expect him to get more volume, so that's why I'm out on Dalvin Cook. He's not in the top 30. And also, Samaje Perine, I don't think he's startable. I think Javonte Williams is going to continually get more work as the weeks go on. So I think Perine should be stuck on your bench unless anything happens to Javonte Williams in the upcoming weeks or throughout the season. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a thumbs up. If you disagreed or agreed with anything, leave it in the comment section down below. I will catch you in the next video. Good luck in your week 2 matchups. Peace out.